Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed, although, again, one guy, not even with the stack of comics for today, but been on a kick lately of watching Batman films. Did the 20th anniversary of Batman Begins really got me watching all the films, and so I spent a good portion of last week, had some time off and watched the majority, if not all, of the on-screen Batman films again, and thought it'd be fun to just kind of go through my thoughts on who the greatest Batman of all time is. And a huge part of the fun for me on this is to see who do you guys believe is the greatest Batman of all time. And so, to me, in having this debate, I think you outline it. I think there's seven people who I would say have played Batman cinematically. We're gonna go only with live action folks. No offense at all to some of the great animated, voice actors. Obviously, the late great Kevin Conroy, Reno Romano, who did a great job with the Batman cartoon, Diedrich Bader, who did a great job. So many great actors have done the voice work for Batman. But in this, just wanted to look at the live action folks. And so the main qualifications for this is has to have been a guy who played Batman and was cast as the lead as Batman. So there was like Ian Glenn who played him on Titans. You had Conroy with that real brief one in Crisis of Infinite Earths. Not going to count any of those. Just the seven main guys who had like a cinematic lead role as Batman. So that would be West, Keaton, Affleck, Kilmer, Clooney, Pattinson, and Bale. So I thought I'd kind of go through all seven of them, go through what I think the strengths and weaknesses are, and then kind of just have some fun and sort of rank them at the end. And so I think the starting point, obviously, you got to start with Adam West, who not only had the live action TV show for years, but there was a movie for him as Batman. And I think the interesting thing for Adam West is he gets seen as the campy Batman, but in all honesty, he was very comic accurate for his era. If you go back to the 60s when he's playing Batman, there is no Frank Miller Batman yet. Neil Adams Batman wasn't really a thing yet. And so you're really just going with those initial appearances and then a very long portion of Batman being more of a campy character because as comic books got a little lighter after their initial years, you had a Batman who was very different. So I think the things that Adam West does really well. One is Adam West plays the stereotypical strongman hero very, very well. Very square jawed, great look in the costume. Obviously, costume design affected by budget, but he plays, Batman very well. And the costume is pretty comic accurate for that time. I think what West did really, really well is he does play a nice blend of Batman being tough, but also intelligent. And obviously, look, this isn't a campier show. It's very hard to take it serious. But he does come off very smart in the scenes where he needs to be smart, very thoughtful, plays him, suitably tough in the moments that he needs to be. And while you can say the physicality wasn't quite there in the way that it was for other actors for the performance that he was asked to give, he was in great shape to play Batman at the time. I think the other huge aspect for Adam West that really works in his favor is, unlike a lot of the Batmans on this list, he is only one of two who have ever had to play Batman as like a father figure, which, despite the fact that Robin's been around almost since the beginning, that dynamic has been all but ignored for most on screen versions of Batman. And so I think when you add that element in, West gives a really, really strong performance. Now, it's tough to take him serious. Some of that is the tone, some of that is the actor. But I do think, in terms of comic accuracy for when he played the character, West has a really, really strong performance as Batman that you have to absolutely give a ton of consideration to. If you look at it, we go with the second Batman, possibly the most pivotal Batman, and probably the sentimental favorite for most, which is Michael Keaton from Batman 1989. So I think if you talk about the strengths of Keaton as Batman, one, the costume, the look, the way he feels like the cowl, that's a huge part of the character work in a movie. He does that really well. He does a really good Batman voice. He delivers his lines with a lot of seriousness, but also just that tinge of kind of like a scary vibe to him. And he does that very well, much better than you would thought Michael Keaton would ever do. I think the parts that sort of hurt Michael Keaton a little bit. While I think Michael Keaton's a very good actor, I don't necessarily get the genius kind of thing that you'd expect from Batman in his performance. His Batman is a little more unhinged, right? As much as it's you want to get nuts, let's get nuts is kind of a funny thing. That is a very specific to this Batman that doesn't quite fit, the character himself. I think the other thing is his Batman is a little more brutal in terms of obviously the actions he takes, but like killing and then smiling after he kills the guy is kind of weird. And Batman Returns throws the guy down the subway. Great. There is a lot of darkness to his performance, and I think what he did do a good job of is obviously look, there's different interpretations of the character in the comics, but he did capture a lot of that tortured soul kind of Batman where you do feel a bit more like Bruce Wayne is completely fake and Batman is really the only time that he's actually who he is. I do think the critiques I'd have of Keaton is I do think in the physicality aspect, look, compared to a normal guy, in good shape. But for Batman, not sure that he was suitably physical in terms of what Batman is on the page himself. So I do think while a great Batman, I think with the writing issues, some of the gaps that are in there with the character, maybe not playing him as detective-ish or smart as you would expect from Batman, I do think there's a little bit there. I think what actually has helped Keaton quite a bit, his performance in The Flash. I think is actually his best performance as Batman. And that while yeah, the stupid scene with the spaghetti and all that stuff was not great. Once he's in the suit playing old man Batman, he did feel a lot more like the character in that movie than he did in the other ones, at least in my opinion. And I do think it helps that you have a guy who in his almost 70s or in his 70s was able to suitably play the role. I think that really stands in his favor. All right, we go to the next one. Val Kilmer, Batman Forever. Here's what's interesting about Val Kilmer. He's the third on-screen Batman that I'm considering on here. I think Kilmer's the most underrated Batman in that one of the things he did is he actually gave Bruce Wayne a lot of heart in a way that Keaton did not. In the movie, Bruce Wayne is almost 50% of the character as is Batman, where in the other ones, it's a lot more the focus on Batman than it is on actually with Bruce Wayne. Keaton or Kilmer was the first one I think who leaned a little more into the playboy elements of Bruce Wayne, kind of a little bit more of what you'd expect out of a comic Batman, where he's more of the billionaire playboy, kind of showing people the irresponsible side of Bruce Wayne. He also does get the mentorship part because he has a Robin in the movie. And I think he did a good job of balancing that dynamic of Batman as like a father figure, older brother figure to Dick Grayson, where he has some moments where he's kind of like a parental figure, but he also has a very commanding presence in the film. Keaton, I think, where he does lose points, despite the fact that I really like, or not Kilmer, but I really like Kilmer, I think he loses points. Some of the intimidation factor that you need in being Batman, I don't know that he necessarily brought that physicality, that presence, right? Again, compared to a normal guy, great shape. But I do think some of the physicality required for Batman wasn't quite there. I do think he played a great detective Batman and that you did very much buy Kilmer in that part of it. So I think he balanced some of the Batman traits that you'd need, but I do think there's a little bit of a gap there. Fourth one, George Clooney. And I'll be honest, Clooney is the guy that I feel the worst for on it. And that I do think if you watch Clooney's performances in other movies, like the Ocean's 11 movies where he plays Danny Ocean, or I think it's The Peacemaker, an older 90s movie he was in, he really could have been a great Batman. I think the part for Clooney that's difficult is given the material that he had, who really could have been successful with it. Now, I will say a great actor would typically elevate the material, and I don't think Clooney quite did that. He did seem sort of lost and unsure of himself. I give him some credit, and then he did again had the Batman as like a father figure sort of role with him and Robin, but that was written so poorly in the movie that it's really difficult to kind of assess how he is. I think overall the big thing Clooney was lacking is the physical presence of Batman in the film. He didn't really feel ever that he was intimidating. Some of that's the material, some of that's the performance as well, as he just doesn't bring any of that edge that you'd expect out of Batman in a film. Again, nothing against him. I think he gets way too much crap. I don't think anybody could have been good in that role. But I do think Clooney just, there's a lot missing, and I think some you have to chalk up to the performance as well. We go with the three newer Batmans, right? For most folks, in their 20s or so, the ones that you have seen probably more. You got Christian Bale. And I think Bale kind of stands out in a lot of ways. One, Bale is the first person I think to truly play the full spectrum of Batman as a character, and that he plays the public Bruce Wayne, the playboy philanthropist part of it. He plays a very serious Batman, and then he also kind of plays it in between, like the real Bruce Wayne, where it's not quite the Batman where he's trying to intimidate and physically impose on people, but he is more serious than the playboy version, and that's I think what he did such a great job at, and that his connection with Alfred in the movie, and some of that's just the great writing that's in the movies. But the way that he plays a Bruce Wayne who connects with Rachel Dawes and connects with, Lucius Fox and Alfred, I think he nailed that really well. I think from the billionaire playboy part, he played that perfectly in that there is a Tony Stark-esque, and I know he predates Tony Stark, but one of the reasons Downey was so good as Iron Man is even when he was being a jerk in those movies, you still found him lovable. And I think Bale did such a good job of he can be playing an absolute jerk in some of the scenes, but he still comes off as really charming and you like him. And I think that works really well. I think the other part that Bale did really good is Bale to me was the first Batman where you really bought him as the genius detective. Christian Bale's acting range, you buy when he's in a room that he's the smartest guy in the room. And I think he built a lot of that into the character where you could just see that his Bruce Wayne was a little bit different than most of the other characters. I do think also from a physically intimidating presence in the films, Bale was probably in the best shape or second best shape of any of the Batmans that we've had. And I do think the fight scenes and the physicality that he brought to the character really shone through really well for him. So I do think Bale, some of it obviously is the strength of the material that he was given, but I do think he elevated a lot of the material as well. He really nailed a lot of the character. We go to the last two, right? So you get Ben Affleck, and Affleck is interesting because unlike the other characters, other actors on the list, he never really got a full film to be Batman. Right now, Batman and Superman, he's clearly, I think, the lead of that film. If you look at the overall screen time, and then you throw in Justice League and his performance in Flash and a couple other things, he had enough time as the character. I think what Affleck did well is Affleck might be the best Batman that we got, but I think his Bruce Wayne was tough. And that in terms of the costume, the physicality, the way that he played the role in a physically imposing way, the way he cleared out rooms as the character, right? You buy him in that role of like, oh my gosh, that's Batman. Really, really well. I think his Bruce Wayne is interesting in that clearly they are writing a very different Batman. And some of this obviously is just Zack Snyder wanting this darker take. But I do think the problem with Affleck's Batman is I don't necessarily ever buy Ben Affleck's performance in this as like he's the smartest guy in the room, which Batman, that's a huge piece of who Batman should be. I think the other part is unlike Bale, where the billionaire philanthropist kind of jerk moments came off as charming, Affleck's came off a bit more like a jerk than his. And again, that's probably the way it was written. I don't necessarily blame Affleck for that. But I do think there is something to Bruce Wayne being this likable playboy that you kind of love to hate sort of thing for the public. Whereas Affleck, I think you more just thought he was a jerk. I think the other part that Affleck had, and some of this is a lot of the material, is his Batman is a little bit more unhinged than some of the other Batmans. This scenes where he's yelling and like losing his temper with Superman and stuff like that. Again, some of that's the writing, but that does hurt the overall performance. I think the problem for Affleck is he either gets too much praise, in my opinion, or too much criticism. I think the material impacts him quite a bit, but I will give him a lot of credit. I think the physicality they brought to the role really, really helped sell the character very well, especially because he's the only Batman who had to interact off of other superheroes, right? We've had Robin, but no one had to play Batman in terms of a role in the Justice League the way that Affleck did. And so I do think he gets a lot of credit for that. Lastly, there's Pattinson. And Pattinson, if I was teaching, I think it's almost unfair to grade Pattinson, although with the delays, it may seem like we don't even get another part of Pattinson. But I think the thing where Pattinson, I think his Batman is really, really good, and you do buy him as the intelligent detective Batman. And the physicality that was in the scenes, at least from the way the fights were choreographed, I think worked really, really well from him. That fight scene in like the subway train, he did a really good job of playing that off. I think he also played a pretty good Batman in terms of his relationship with Catwoman. I thought that dynamic was well written, and I thought his performance, and again, some of that's Zoe Kravitz and the chemistry that they had, but I do think he played that really well, and I think you kind of bought that Batman Catwoman relationship, at least in my opinion, more than I bought the other Batman Catwoman relationships that have been on screen. Where Pattinson to me loses a lot of points. His Bruce Wayne's really not a character. And again, I get that because Batman's the real character, Bruce Wayne's the mask. I understand that dynamic. But there's almost no attempt at Bruce Wayne here. He's the reclusive kind of weirdo sort of thing, and I think some of that's the like they wanted to inspire on Kurt Cobain kind of thing, and so some of that's Matt Reeves' writing. But Pattinson doesn't really bring any of the Bruce Wayne charm to the scenes. Right, there's very few moments in the film where you buy like that public persona Bruce Wayne that's so synonymous with the character. I do think some of the scenes with Alfred are really strong. And so I give him some credit on that. And I think his relationship with Catwoman does a lot to detail out the character. Also, his dynamic with Gordon. I think Bale had a really strong one with his Gordon as well. But I think Pattinson had a really good dynamic with Jeffrey Wright. Overall, the hard part for Pattinson is that Pattinson just didn't get to play 50% of the character. And I think that really does kind of hurt him overall. So, looking at the seven, kind of going through the strengths and weaknesses of them. If I had to rank these, I don't want to do like the traditional first through seventh. So I'll kind of just rank them by like a tier list. So I think the bottom of the tier, the worst one would be George Clooney. I'd say not quite the Dark Knight, right? Didn't really play Batman. He got goofy material. It was campy. There was really just no chance for him to succeed. And then he didn't really do anything to elevate the material. So he would be the last place guy. I hate dunking on Clooney as much because I think he gets trashed so much for things that weren't really his fault. But I do think he's got to be last place. Sixth on the list for me would be Pattinson. I think is a work in progress. I love the movie The Batman. I'm a huge fan of that film. But it's really hard to put Pattinson above some of the other guys on the list. And that while I do like his Batman, there's a lot of the character that was missing from that movie. And the few scenes that we did get, he didn't really do anything to make that distinctive, other than play like the tortured soul version of Batman. And I don't know, some of the just the charm that should be there for Bruce Wayne, I don't think ever showed there. Third, underrated but imperfect. I would have this as fifth and fourth, so right below Affleck and Kilmer. I would probably put Affleck right above Kilmer, but I think these two are really, really close. I think both of them get way too much crap for what they did. I think both of them tried really hard to bring a certain version of the characters to the screen. But I do think there's a lot of people who really don't like Batman Forever or really don't like the Snyderverse one. I do think they hit about 75% of the character really, really well. And the part that they get right, while Kilmer, I think, plays the Bruce Wayne piece as well, he's missing a little bit of the Batman edge. And I think Affleck, who nailed the Batman piece, is just missing a little bit of the charm of Bruce Wayne. So I would have them as fourth and fifth on the list. Third, bronze medalist. This probably makes some people mad. I'm going to go Michael Keaton. I think the level of importance that Keaton had to making Batman the cultural icon that has spanned since '89 when that movie came out to now, you have to give his performance a lot of credit. His Bruce Wayne is always a little bit off, which is why I can't put him above the other two on the list. But his Batman, the menace that he brought to the character, the darkness that he brought to the character, I think he balanced a lot of the elements of the character really, really well. Number two, I'm going to say Batman Forever, not the movie he was in, but I have him second, Adam West. I will never default. I'll be mad at anybody who says Adam West is their favorite Batman. For the time, again, you have to consider the source material that existed at the time. Adam West played as accurate a comic book Batman as existed at that time. Right? Comics were campy, they were kind of goofy. And I do think there's an earnestness to his performance that always shines through and an integrity that he plays his Bruce Wayne with. When the edge of the character wasn't really there, he does play a straight-laced superhero, and I think he does it really well, despite being kind of corny material that he's given. And then the GOAT, the greatest of all time. I think it's Bale. I think it'll be really hard for anybody to surpass Christian Bale. Not only do I think he's by far the best actor, just in terms of you take the acting range and skills of anyone on the list, it's just hard to beat what he did with the role because I think he nailed all of the facets of the character really well. You buy him as the smartest guy in the room. You buy him as a great detective. You buy him as a physically imposing force in a fight. You buy the billionaire playboy scenes. You buy, the earnest moments that he needs to have with all the other supporting characters. Yeah, the bat voice gets crap, but again, I do think I appreciated the effort of trying to have a character who's supposed to be as famous in that world as Bruce Wayne, throwing that voice off like that. It really would throw off any suspicion. And so while I do think that's the one sort of facet that you could get mad at, I think even Batman Begins, where the Batman voice was toned down, if he kept that the whole time, would have been much better. But overall, I would have him as the greatest Batman of all time. First place, Christian Bale. So Bale, West, Keaton, Affleck, Kilmer, Pattinson, then Clooney. That would be my rankings of the all-time Batmans. Again, just going off of a comic book fan's opinions, one guy's opinion, but I would be interested to see what do you guys think down below. If you had to rank the Batmans, the live action ones, where would you have them? On the list somewhere. I mean, if he had ever gotten a chance to truly play in live action, man, Kevin Conroy would probably be the best. But again, just going with the live action ones. Be interested to see what you guys think down below. Thanks as always for watching, folks. God bless you. Catch you in the next video.